Today we look at John Snow in Empirical Economics. Now the first thing which has to be acknowledged is that John Snow was not an economist. He's not really thought of in the history of economic thought. And yet he was so great, I really wish he had been an economist. He should have been an economist. Moreover, his techniques and his life story have lessons for economics today. Let's take a look. John Snow was born in 1813 and he died in 1858. He was a physician and an early anesthetologist. So, for example, he administered anesthesia to Queen Victoria in 2 of her births, and with that royal stamp of approval, this procedure became much more common. He's one of the fathers of epidemiology, and he's particularly known for his investigation of the causes of cholera. Cholera is really a horrific disease. The onset is typically quick and deadly. You can be healthy one moment and dead within hours. If left untreated, the fatality rate can approach 50%. One of the most horrible aspects of the disease is that it debilitates the body, but it leaves the mind untouched. So one mid-19th century English newspaper said, "The mind within remains untouched and clear, shining strangely through glazed eyes, a spirit looking out in terror from a corpse." Cholera is an infection in the small intestine. It's caused by bacteria, and the main symptoms are diarrhea and vomiting. And transmission occurs through drinking water or eating food which has been contaminated by the feces of an infected person. So as you can see, it can spread very rapidly because infected people have diarrhea, and when there's not good sanitation, that spreads to other people. In places where there's good sanitation, this isn't much of a problem. But even today, when we have natural disasters, the disease often reasserts itself very quickly. Around the world, millions of people are affected by cholera every year, and it kills over 100,000 annually. This picture is a cholera victim from Haiti. Cholera is pretty much unknown in England until the 19th century, and then it comes in waves in 1833, 1848 and 49, 1854, each time appearing quickly, killing tens of thousands of people and then disappearing. The reason is that cholera is a disease of globalization and urbanization. Globalization brings it in, allows it to spread around the world quite quickly. Urbanization, because the disease transmits itself from fecal matter being ingested. And that usually doesn't happen until you get these mass cities, until you get millions of people living next door to one another, on top of one another, and with a sewage system interspersed with a water system. Because of this disease, this thousands of people dying suddenly, it is the question of the day. What is causing this epidemic? The standard theory is that it's bad air, that it's miasma. And in one sense, this theory makes sense because London did stink. London stunk of cesspools, of sewage which was thrown out into the street, of rotting bodies with cemeteries which were overpiling with people. The standard theory, however, leads to a number of bad ideas. The main one being that the way to get rid of the disease is to take cesspools and put them into the Thames River. Get them out into the river, get them out of the city, stop the bad smell, dump the sewage into the river, and that turns out to have deadly consequences. Snow supports an alternative theory, the germ theory. This is definitely a minority theory of the time. The idea that invisible animals cause disease is even thought to be unscientific, so Snow finds himself very much running against the current of the times. Snow collects lots of data about cholera. And by data, I don't just mean that he went out and collected numbers, although he did that too. He does shoe leather research. He goes and he talks with patients. He finds, for example, that all of them report that their first symptoms had been digestive problems, not respiratory problems, suggesting transmission through food or water rather than through air. He collects data on people who are working at tanneries and other places where there's lots of foul smells, and he finds that they're no more likely to be afflicted with cholera than anyone else. This, in fact, gets him into trouble because some people argue that he's in the pay of the tanners of big business, of these producers of nuisances, of foul smells, because he says they're not the problem, or at least they're not the cause of cholera. Snow investigates cholera like a detective. he discovers that the first victim of the 1848 epidemic was a man called John Arnold, a merchant seaman who had come from Hamburg, where there had been an outbreak of cholera. He had then come to London and died shortly after renting a room. Does this make sense from the bad air theory? No, it doesn't. It's much more likely that he brought the disease with him than he also happened to catch it in London after leaving Hamburg. Moreover, Snow discovers that a few days after Arnold's death, the attending physician has been called back to the very same room to treat another man for cholera. Again, this doesn't really make sense from the miasma theory. Nobody else in the room is sick. The physician himself doesn't get sick. But Snow knows that one of the symptoms of cholera is diarrhea, and he suspects that the room wasn't cleaned very well after Arnold died. In 1854, another cholera epidemic hits London, and the epicenter happens to be just blocks away from where Snow lives. Every day in the midst of this epidemic, Snow comes to the Broad Street area, knocking on doors, meticulously collecting information about how many people who live there and how many people have died, where they get their water from, and so forth. He thinks that the epidemic is centered around the Broad Street pump. He asks, however, not only about those who are dying, but also about those who are not dying. For example, at the workhouse, there's 500 people collected in terrible conditions. Remember, this is 19th century welfare. This is where they say if you're really destitute, you can come here and get work and survive. But the conditions are so horrible that only the destitute would go there. And yet very few of them have died. Why? Snow goes and he finds that the workhouse has its own separate supply of water. And what about the brewery? Again, where very few workers, none in fact, have died. Well, Snow goes and he finds that the workers there, they've got their own well. Moreover, the owner tells them, our workers get free beer, so they're not drinking the water. This line that Snow draws, he will eventually collect all of his data in this map, and he draws this clever line. This is the line where the shortest route to water is to the Broad Street pump. And as you can see, most of the deaths are collected in this area. And yet Snow also asks, well, what about these people over here? And he finds, for example, that often it's the children who are going to school or who are going somewhere, they collect the water or they bring it home from school. So it is the shortest route for them, for the children. So this is a massive collection of meticulously data that Snow goes out on foot to collect. Quite incredible. Incredibly, Snow is working in real time here. So his analysis has convinced him that the Broad Street pump is the cause. And he goes to the Board of Health and he says, remove the handle, take the handle off. And they do so, and the epidemic declines. Today, if you go to Broad Street, now called Broadwick in Soho, London, you can actually go to the John Snow pub. This pub has been in continuous operation since Snow's time, though it hasn't always been called the John Snow pub. Snow, however, was not finished, and in his 1854 book, he made perhaps his greatest contribution to statistical methodology. To understand Snow's grand experiment, or his natural experiment, it's important to understand some economic history. Namely that at this time, London had a private water supply. We're often told that water has to be a natural monopoly. Not so. In fact, London at this time had as many as 10 companies, and sometimes there were multiple pipes going down the same street delivering water. Now in 1852, the Lambeth Company moved the intake for their water upstream, thus obtaining a supply of water quite free from the sewage of London, quoting John Snow. The intake, however, of the Southwark and Vauxhall Company came after the sewage had been dumped into the water. Now here's Snow. The districts supplied by the Lambeth Company are, however, also supplied to a certain extent by the Southwark and Vauxhall Company. The pipes of both companies going down every street in the places where the supply is mixed. So here is his grand experiment, and he explains it just as we would today, as a random experiment. The experiment, too, was on the grandest scale. No fewer than 300,000 people of both sexes, of every age and occupation, and of every rank and station, from gentlefolks down to the very poor, were divided into two groups, without their choice, and in most cases without their knowledge. One group being supplied with water containing the sewage of London, and amongst it whatever might have come from the cholera patients, the other group having water quite free from such impurity. So what was the result of Snow's grand experiment? Snow presents the results of his grand experiment in this fabulous map from his book. The red area is the area served by the Lambeth Company, the one with the clean water. This green area, it used to be blue, but it's faded into green, is the area served by the S&V Company, the company with the dirty water. The area here where both are, this used to be purple, this is the area served by both companies, where there are pipes going down, both companies have pipes going down the same street, the intermixed area. And through meticulous research, Snow was able, as best as possible, as best as one could imagine, to separate out house by house in this area which houses received the clean water and which houses received the dirty water. And what he found was that the companies with the dirty water, from the Southwark and Vauxhall Company, their number of cholera deaths was 315 per 10,000. On the other hand, for the Lambeth Company, the company with the clean water, the number of cholera deaths was 37 per 10,000. Almost by a factor of 10, the company with the clean water had the lower number of cholera deaths. Moreover, Snow then went one step further. He then showed that in 1848, before the Lambeth Company had moved their pipe to Upper Thames, to the clean water, at that time there was no significant difference in mortality. Thus, Snow invented the difference in difference method, which is now regularly and often used by economists to show causal claims. An absolutely stellar achievement from John Snow. So there you have it, a triumph of empirical research. Snow has created a natural experiment. He has gathered data. He has talked with people. He has created a convincing argument. He, in fact, in real time has located the source of the cholera epidemic, and he has shut down that pump, and he has saved many, many lives. Case closed, right? No. In fact, Snow still has not convinced people. They don't want to believe. They don't want to think about feces. They don't want to look at the evidence. Decades pass, in fact, before Snow is recognized for his pioneering contributions on cholera, and only, in fact, many, many decades later is he recognized for his empirical research. Still, in a March 2003 survey by Hospital Doctor, he was voted the greatest doctor of all time, with Hippocrates coming in second. Not bad. To hear some personal thoughts on lessons for empirical researchers. First, shoe leather. Go out and talk with people on the ground. There's a lot of wisdom out there. There's a lot to be learned by actually speaking with people. Don't just look for data which somebody else has collected. Go out and collect original data. Try multiple approaches to the same problem. Macro statistics, micro statistics, but also anecdotes. Don't be afraid to approach theory and empirics in different ways. Multiple ways of coming at the same idea. Different sources of evidence converging on the same conclusion. Look for things like that. Look for natural experiments, which can be extremely compelling. Use maps and tables, not just regressions. And write about important issues. Here are some further references. Stephen Johnson's book is great, The Ghost Map. It's a rip-roaring story. He actually spends less time on the grand experiment than I would have, but then again, he's not an economist. Stephen Chapin is very good. This is a review, actually, of Stephen Johnson's book. Tons of information at this website on John Snow. Lots of information about Snow and his times. This is a useful guide to some of that information, focusing on the grand experiment. And then for the statistical methodology, take a look at David Friedman's classical article, Statistical Models and Shoe Leather. Thanks.